Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is Mark Hadley and I am your host today for the Geneva Push Planter Session, the first one of the year for 2016. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we're really looking forward to talking about becoming a multi-site church plant, and we have some great guests with you. But before we get underway, I just wanted to say thank you particularly for our sponsor. Our sponsor for this event is EA Insurance. Now, EA Insurance handles all sorts of insurance for various organisations, but makes a specialty of also taking care of church planters. We thoroughly recommend them. If you haven't actually talked about anything to do with insurance yet, with your church plant or the ministries that you're discussing, we couldn't think of something better than to actually encourage you to talk to EA Insurance. They're a great start for all those sorts of things. Part of what we're doing today is basically to bring you practical tools. So one of the great things that we'll be doing in the webinar today is to ask you to submit your questions. Now, initially, Scott Sanders, our Executive Director of Geneva Push, will be conducting the interviews with our talent first off, but after that, you're going to get an opportunity to put your questions to everybody. Now, that's a great opportunity for you to use the chat function on the WebEx tool that you dialed into. There are a few things you probably want to know about using your WebEx control panel. The first is that you'll have a couple of options. One is misleadingly called Q&A. Don't use that. Just use chat and send your questions directly to me, the host. When you send them to me, I'll be able to collate them, and then when it comes to question and answer time, I'll feed them through to Scott and he can get them to our guests okay. So the first thing we'd like you to do is to just, if you can, locate the chat window. That's one of the simplest things you can do just by using that green drop-down menu that's probably at the top of your screen, and click on the chat, and then that'll open up so you can send your questions through anytime you like. Scott is quite helpfully circling that about the drop-down menu at the moment, and you'll see his video will be appearing a little later when we get into the show. Now, without further ado, I should probably just hand over to Scott so he can actually concentrate more on introducing everybody else rather than introducing me. Thanks very much for your participation, and I'll look forward to chatting to you as things go on.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here for the first webinar for the year. It's great to have Graham and Brian with us. I'll introduce those guys in a second. Multi-site. I just want to sort of set the scene for the next hour or so. What are we talking about? We're talking about multi-site. Well, we're defining multi-site today as one church that has two or more locations with a shared leadership, budget, vision, and board. So what does that look like? Well, I think there are three models that are operating at the moment in Australia, and I'll give some examples of those. We've got the video venue model, where you create one or more campus environments that use video cast sermons live or recorded, often with varying worship styles at location. So you have a different worship style maybe for the inner city versus, say, the suburban church, and so you're able to actually meet the demographic. So I guess Hillsong's a great example of using video campuses around Australia and also around the world. And City on a Hill, I think my understanding is City on a Hill down in Melbourne. They are one church in three locations: Geelong, the inner west of Melbourne, and Melbourne City. And I think once a month there is a video campus, set up an arrangement. But for the other three or four times in the month, there's a face-to-face sermon taking place. The second type of model is the regional campus model. So you replicate the experience of the original campus at additional campuses in order to make the church more accessible to other geographic communities. Some people call this sort of a franchise type relationship, but it's trying to take the best, the DNA or the healthy aspects of the mother church and then relocate that in campuses around the city. MBM, Rudy Hill, are pursuing this model. They're hoping to plant a campus in Horsley Park at the end of this year, and also where I guess we've seen that in Holy Trinity Adelaide, where they have independent campuses that obviously have some similarities between the two of them. The final model is the teaching team model. That's where you leverage a strong teaching team across multiple locations at the original campus or an off-site campus. Generally, that's when you've got two or three experienced preachers, and you're able to move those, move those preachers around the different campuses. We see that, I guess, in Creek Road. I've heard Steve Cree talk about how, as a team, they work on the sermon. Redeemer Presbyterian in New York has 5 locations, and I think they have a team teaching model where I think they have 2 or 3 preachers who might deliver that sermon. Now, what are some of the issues? So there are some issues with multi-site. One, you need to know who you are as a church. You need to clarify what matters. The importance of actually finding the campus pastor and understanding who that campus leader is. You need to communicate one site or multi-site effectively. So this is a big change for your church, so communication is really important. You need to think about the changes within staff and within your leadership team, and often, that's where a lot of friction is caused as you move to this process. And then finally, how do you keep all these things connected? Well, it is great to have Brian and Graham with us today. Let me introduce Brian recently, because they're going to give their experience of Kingston and the Kingston Reformed network down in Hobart and in Tasmania. So let me tell you briefly about Brian. Brian grew up in Adelaide, worked as a senior executive with a South Australian gas company, managed teams in information systems and industrial and commercial marketing. In 1992, he moved to Geelong to study at the Reformed Theological College, and he was subsequently called to serve the Christian Reformed Church in Kingston, which is just outside of Hobart or inside Hobart, which included a number of churches and congregations that planted over a number of years, including Bay Christian Church. So you'll see the Bay Christian Church launch team just here. So this was one of the first church plants that came out. And then in 2012, Brian was called to New Life Christian Church out at Blacktown, and he's been doing a work of revitalisation over the last few years. Brian, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be there. Good morning.
I'll come to you in a second. I just want to introduce our other guest, Graham. Graham, are you there?
Yes.
Excellent. Graham's been pastoring One Way Church since 2006. One Way Church is one of the campuses or one of the sites of the Kingston Reformed network. Graham is originally from the UK, as you can hear from the accent, and after working in a church plant project in Hull in the UK, Graham and his wife Ali came over to Tasmania to work with the Vision 100 network and to work with the church in Kingston. You've been pastoring One Way, which is a church in Margate in Tasmania, and you've been involved in planting 2 new churches, which is really exciting. So it's great to have you here too, Graham. So we can get the warts and all approach. Often you just hear the nice picture from the leaders. It's great to have you here as a site leader as well. Well, Brian, can I come to you first? Brian, it'd be great if you could tell us the history of the Kingston CRC network.
Yeah, well, we decided after a couple of years of growth at Kingston that we should plant churches, and in order to have those churches well supported and well focused, we thought we'd better develop a covenant document or a covenant between those churches agreeing to cooperate and share resources and network. So that covenant was put in place after the first couple of church plants, and it was a covenant that really strengthened the churches in their working together, but also helped them to share those administrative resources. It really depended very much on the leaders cooperating together. So the leaders became sort of like a Pauline team, sharing training resources, supporting one another, and cooperating in further church planting effort. The leaders working together, we needed to work together at 3 levels, I think. One was to be united around the gospel, obviously, and the theology of what we were doing. Secondly, to be united around the priorities of the ministry and the methods of ministry, particularly, the focus on mission and evangelism and discipleship and raising up leaders, those 2 things. And then thirdly, we needed to be individuals who got on with each other. So that's the whole idea of churches cooperating together is, I think, a biblical theme that we see particularly through Acts and the work of Paul and so on, in the relationship between Jerusalem and Antioch and Paul and Barnabas working there, the work around Ephesus with the smaller churches, Colossae, Thyatira and so on, Miletus, where there is obviously connection and networking happening. Epaphras obviously heard Paul teaching in Ephesus in the Hall of Tyrannus, and then went and planted the church in Colossae. So I'm sure Paul mentored this guy, and we see that through his letters.
Yep.
So there was cooperation happening in the New Testament, and I think that's the basis on which we thought this work should proceed.
Because there are some objections to multi-site church in that the sites themselves are actually churches and need to have membership discipline and an established leadership structure there. So the whole one church in 3 locations, I guess some would make an argument, a biblical case that it's actually not one church, but 4 churches working together. As you say, unity, cooperations are really important. How did you practice? I mean, I'm interested here. How did you actually practically keep alignment, amongst all those pastors? Because I met your staff. I met your staff team. I know your staff team quite well. They're all, leaders in their own right. What did you do as the leader of that as you transitioned to a number of, sites? How did you keep everyone together in that, unified vision?
Well, it's actually meeting together regularly. We had staff meetings every week.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, where we just read the Word of God together, prayed and shared what was in our diaries. So we sort of got to know each other and what we were doing. But I also spent time with each of the leaders individually once a month,
yep.
Just meeting with them and chatting with them. And thirdly, we used to do very occasionally social events with the wives and the pastors. So we would have dinner over, say, at Graham and Ali's place, and we'd do that with all the staff. And occasionally we'd get together. So there was a lot of meeting together, and keeping the focus together and so on. And I think that was important. Selection is obviously really important, to select the sort of right leaders with the right mindset.
So is that a group decision amongst the pastors when you're selecting a new campus or site leader?
It was probably more left up to me and the elders of the church, but I think towards the end we all sort of did know the people who were coming into the network, because they actually were mostly people who were raised up in the Presbyterian Reformed network, and I think that's the beauty of it. If you raise up your own leaders, you already know these guys, so that's a real benefit. The other thing we did is we set a little bit of a covenant document for the team.
Mm-hmm.
We won't gossip for one another, we'll love each other, we'll serve one another, we'll support and encourage one another. So that was also put in place. So it's quite clear as to how we wanted to operate.
Great. So regular meetings, meeting one-to-one with each staff team leader, doing stuff outside of church, having a covenant. That's some excellent practical advice there. Brian, I want to bring you in on this because this is your slide. I guess one of the objections to multi-site often is that it's actually not effective. But you can see below the line there the fruit of the pursuing a multi-site strategy over time. So Graham, I wonder if you could just explain the bottom half of this timeline here.
G'day everyone. Look, it's really just an attempt to show, and it's not to scale. There's a rough sort of approximation to do with it. So the width of each colour is approximately the sort of proportional size of the church. Yep. As they relate to each other.
They're always good at expanding numbers, so there's no problems there having a larger.
Yes. So for instance, at Kingston is about 350, and the others are significantly smaller than that, right at this right-hand end. So anyway, look, it just shows the points at which church planting happened. Each of the circles happened at a point in time. That was the beginning of a new church plant under the sort of regime that Brian's already outlined, and that's continued. Kingston, being the deep red, began that and has continued to do that, but it's also passed on the baton, and some of the other churches are now planting in their own right. Also, above the central Reformed churches and Presbyterian divide there, so looking at the top half, there's a notable example of partnership in church planting outside of our denomination. So the Reformed church is planting with the Prezzies just fairly early on, and that was to kick off Cornerstone Christian Church. And look, you can carry along in your own church and you might see small growth, and to be honest, that's what we've seen, small growth. But when you multiply it along, you know, by the amount of new churches begun, that growth amounts to quite a bit. And it's been a real source of encouragement, actually, and praise and thanks to God.
Yeah, I mean, I really love how you can see the impact of a church plant coming on board. There's obviously, as you send out, you know, there's a decrease in the mother church or the, you know, the hub, but then you see the growth, you know, start to take place. So that's an encouraging slide. Graham, I wonder if you can tell us your perspective as a team member, as a site leader. What are some of the struggles that you had to wrestle with in, you know, saying yes, you're in Hull and you and Ali are wrestling with the decision, do we join this team? What are the struggles, and I guess what are the obvious benefits and the reasons for saying, yeah, this is a great thing, we're going to up and move our family and join a multi-site church?
Well, we didn't necessarily know all the details of what we were coming into. In fact, the reality was the job we applied for wasn't really the job that was ready to go when we actually, you know, eventually got here.
Yep.
What was very clear, though, was the commitment to put the gospel first, and to ground the mission and activity and the priorities of the church and its dreams and vision firmly in that, super clearly and with a real sense of oomph. Now, by the time we came over, Brian, I think, had done an awful lot of work already in getting commitment in the main Kingston Reformed Church to those goals of raising up new leaders and mission, extending the kingdom through church planting. So those were talked about a lot, and those were very much part of certainly the fabric of, or the culture of Kingston by the time we got there. So it was just exciting to come into. It made it a lot easier when we've been there not long and Brian said, oh, actually, we've got a different job for you, which would be to take over one of these church plants. And it sort of went from there. But I think for us, it was that clarity of convictions of raising up leaders and planting churches that were bedded in and were being pushed forward with a real sense of purpose. So.
Now, Graham, it's interesting. Would you call yourself, you know, someone who's flexible, who's, you know, agile, you know, someone who can handle, you know, change? Because a lot of people might have, you know, come down, seen a job description there, and said, that's what I've signed up for. You know, no, I don't want to be a part of this. You know, what aspects, I guess, of your character, of just how you're wired, your personality, I guess, lend themselves to a multi-site campus, you know, pastor role?
Well, two considerations there. First of all, there's my character and there's my wife's character, and they're not the same. I'm very laid back. Look, I think to reiterate, knowing that the gospel was central and knowing that the ministry that we were coming into was an expression of, you know, this vision and mission being worked out. And the fact that actually the new job was probably more exciting than the original job, that probably helped in many ways. I suppose we had a confidence. There'd been like a whole long couple of years of interacting about the opportunity and a bit of chatting with not just Brian but various other people in situ. And so there was certainly an awareness and a confidence in the approach and in the culture, which meant that when a slightly unsettling thing of, oh, actually the job's something different now, that made it, much easier, just to accept and to actually grab it with both hands, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to bring you back in, Brian. I want to ask you, how did you actually go for this approach? So I've got a number of leaders listening in who might be thinking about moving to towards, rather than multi-congregations on one side, actually moving to off-site. Tell us about the decision-making process for multi-site.
Well, we've been convinced as a mother church that we should be involved in discipleship and mission, and particularly raising up leaders. And really the growth that we had in Kingston sort of forced our hand a little bit. We got to over 80% full in the church building. And as a result, we thought, well, what can we do? Either we grow a bit, we have a bigger building, or we plant churches. And we decided to plant churches. The congregation made a decision, a proactive decision, to be proactive in planting churches. Now, we wanted to do that well. And we wanted to maintain the focus on raising up leaders and discipling people and the mission of the church. And so we thought, well, how can we do that well? And the best thing is for churches to cooperate together. And so Kingston was a strong mother church. It had good resources. And so we thought, if that strong mother church can remain connected to the church plants for an extended period of time at least, then we would end up having a strong network, and those church plants would get off to a good start. So there was strength in creating that network, but there's also strength in creating a leadership network where the leaders were actually cooperating together, working together, supporting each other and so on. And that would also lend strength to the church planting and the multi-site work. So hence we created this covenant document, and that's the basis of it. And there is a healthy level of independence built into the network.
Yep.
You could say that each church had its own pastor. Each church was allowed to develop its own strategies within the gospel focus and missional focus that we had, because they've got unique people in their congregation, they've got unique context in which they're working. So all that was really important, to have a level of independence, but yet a strong focus together on what we're doing.
Brian, can you tell me how important it is to be growing as a church? The literature I've read, hearing a number of multi-site pastors talk about the decision, all of them have said, you want to have a growing church. There needs to be momentum in the church. Multi-site's not the solution to, I guess, creating growth. You need to already have the existing, church growing, and as you say, often it's a building problem, or there's just a need to reach a community down the road. So how important was it that Kingston, I guess, was growing, and maybe reflect on New Life now, as you think about Blacktown, and obviously, no doubt you're thinking again of cooperating with local churches. When is the growth trajectory good enough or reasonable enough to actually start to do this?
Well, the thing about it is that I think I expect the church to grow. I think God expects his church to grow. And so, every church should be expecting to grow. And God gives the growth at the rate that he gives. Kingston wasn't growing at a spectacular rate. It was already a fairly large church, so 350 people. It maybe went up to about 450, and that was pretty much the capacity of the building. So there was slow but steady growth. We're seeing the same at New Life. But also, philosophically, I know God gives what he gives, and so you deal with that. But I prefer a multi-site church or multiple churches than mega church, if you get my drift. So I think when you have many churches, you've got many more opportunities for gospel outreach in different communities than you have with one big church. And I think Tim Keller's proved the point many times in his work and research that a church that plants churches both grows as a mother church, and also you see growth in the church plant because the focus is much more on the mission as a result of what you're doing. So I think that growth factor is very important, and you can see it in the chart that Graham put up there, or the one that you had up earlier. There is spectacular growth when you look at that chart. And it's quite amazing. It amazes me. I think all glory to God, but it's just amazing to see. And Kingston, really, when you look at it, it's given off groups of people, but it's bounced back each time.
Yeah.
And it's maintained its fairly large size as a church.
Graham, did you want to comment on that?
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we were thinking just as one way. We've been involved with sending, significant, in the context of our smaller church, people, groups of people away. We've done that twice. We felt it pretty keenly both times. But again, and you look at those churches and you think in their own way, they're going in their own way, they've got their struggles. But when you put them all together and you think the gospel is being proclaimed and gospel ministry is being upheld and the name of Jesus is being exalted in 3 different locations, in 3 different contexts, with 3 different groups of people now, each with a more specific, more focused sense of vision and purpose. That's what I need to keep me, encouraged to keep going the same way. Because it's amazing when you put the 3 together. We've got sort of 80 at one way. There's 50 at Snug, and there's maybe 60 at Redeemer now. But from where they began, and look, some of it's transfer. There's a few conversions in there, but together you're looking at a multiplication, not just of people of the size of a church. You're looking at 3 churches. You're looking at 3 ministries. You're looking at 3 sets of opportunities. And that's an exciting perspective, I think, and it does us all good just to reflect on that.
It's helpful, Graham. I guess speaking about your experience. I guess Brian, you've mentioned some of the important keys are that each church had its own pastor. So I can hear in your philosophy of multi-site is that a church has a congregational pastor and a leader. You're not looking for 1,000, 2,000 people in that site. Each church has its own cost centre and overall budget. So can you tell us why that's important, Brian, for each church to have their own cost centre and budget?
Well, because we wanted also to put a level of accountability in the church that it didn't. I mean, the Kingston Church was very generous and supported those church plants particularly early, very strongly financially. But we also wanted the churches to own that a little bit themselves and say, okay, we've got to actually try to meet our budget and so on. And so we actually did have separate cost centres for that.
And then the final one, each church would, which Graham's just mentioned there, each church would have the opportunity to work out their own mission strategy and plans within the broader vision, which that gives you that flexibility, doesn't it? You've got the overall regional vision and then you've got the flexibility to respond to the local needs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that worked fairly well. So each church spent a bit of time planning their own workout each year and their direction and strategy, and we talked about that among the team a bit, and we shared some of that stuff.
Now,
So
Brian, you left in 2012. You were called up to New Life. Graham, can you tell us about some of the changes that were made then? Given Brian's leaving and why those decisions were made.
Well, I think it's because Brian left that those decisions were made. Yeah, there's only one Brian, just like there's only one of each of us, really. But I think the reality was we've just continued. Where we're at now is just a logical extension of where we were already heading. But we don't have that designated one person overall, role that's, a significant part of one person's job role. So Brian had a lot of his role focused on the whole vision and driving things forward. That still happens, but Brian's total job role has now been divided up amongst the sort of senior staff members who have taken over those individual churches. So, I mean, that's probably the main change, and it has meant a few different changes that ripple on from that, really, which I don't think are bad. It just means that perhaps things aren't necessarily able to happen as fast as they used to.
Yep.
Because there's myself with a 10% network vision sort of role that's set aside as part of my job role, and it reflects something of what Brian used to do, but not certainly not in the same way as Brian used to do it.
So in a sense, each church's leader, pastor, has network responsibilities and then their own church responsibilities. So you still share key activities like financing, budgeting, payroll. You still have central administrative churches as a network of churches, and then compliance matters, things like HR and staffing matters. You still do those things together, but then each of the pastors has you're given to thinking about the network 10% of the time. Is that sort of how it operates now?
Yes. So part of my role is going around the other pastors and just talking with them about plans for the future and the ways that they're particularly going. But if a big opportunity came up for the network as a whole, when we meet together as network leaders, which we do from time to time, 4 times a year, we talk about, and this is both for opportunities and sort of big challenges that we face, these things land on the network table, and we as network pastors and leaders have a think about what we can do about it, or how can we make this happen, or how are we going to help out in the face of this challenge. That's the way that we think, and I guess it's a whole lot of collaboration, but it works out in a slightly different way as it used to under Brian.
Yeah. So there's obviously growing complexity as you have more sites. Matt Malcolm's asked the question, clarify how many campus sites are shared by the leadership rather than plants off the main site. In the process over 10 years of starting these 5 churches, they were all they're all networked churches, not separate plants. None of these churches have, I guess, initially became independent. They all stayed as part of the whole, but more recently, with Brian leaving, would you say you've got 4? Yeah, I guess explain the structure of the churches. So you've got Summerlees One Way, Kingston Reformed Church, and now you've got Snug and other churches. Can you just give us an overview of the churches, Brian?
Yeah, self-consciously, the churches view themselves as churches. And that was the clarity that emerged, and it sort of was dealing with that, what do we call ourselves? What's one church and 3 congregations? Ecclesiologically, how does that stand up? I think self-consciously each church and each church plant has always had the view of, because it's been assigned its own pastor and a leadership team, and because the journey has always been towards separate institution in its own right as a Reformed church. For most of them, slightly different with Snug, which is an independent evangelical church, but it's always been with that in mind. The issue then is what to call our togetherness, and that's where the network thing has come in. It deals with, as you've mentioned already, and we've seen on the slides, there's a whole bunch of shared activity. A lot of that is the mundane grunt work of finance and budgets and compliance and all that sort of stuff, and it's just such a joy to be able to just put that over in the centre. As a network, we staff that, we share the costs pro rata, and we include those things in our budgets. KISS provide all of that, that's taken care of, and that works really well. But there's also other opportunities that we still share, because we still align ourselves together very closely in partnership, not just formally as leaders, but just in that gathering together. We still have our staff meetings, we still share opportunities, we explore new opportunities together, not necessarily as a whole network, but maybe 2 or 3 churches within the network. So we enjoy those sorts of benefits.
So Graham, eventually here, Snug, as you said, is an independent church plant. So how did that decision-making process happen? How did Snug decide not to, become part of the Southern CRC network and part of this network?
Well, we actually still include Dan as we invite him along to our staff meetings, and he attends those regularly. with us. So we still retain that broader partnership, but the realities there were to do with, I suppose, sidestepping some complexities. We had an opportunity come up to use a building, an Anglican building in Snug, and also some funds to go with that. Yep. We were able to, because we've been talking about it for a long time in the network, and certainly from Brian's time, well into that time as well, about a possibility of working Snug. So there were some people, a lot of people who live there, who were primed and ready, certainly within our church. It's something that we as One Way Christian Church had thought about and prayed about for a while, given it's the next suburb along from us. And so this sort of people resource, as well as the sort of physical building and finance resource, as well as the availability of my former apprentice and now the pastor there, Dan, to push forward with church planting and being eager, as all church planters are, to get going with that. All of those things came together, and when we thought, okay, what's this going to look like? Who's going to have oversight, and how's this going to run? We weighed it all up and thought it'd actually be not only perhaps easier, but actually probably more helpful in the context of Tassie overall, to actually push out and do something a bit different. And express partnership in the gospel, and to form an independent evangelical church so they're working with the FIEC in terms of some oversight and alignment there. There's a board of reference which includes myself and a few others in Tassie from the sort of Vision 100 stable, and there's also that partnership in the gospel expression of Dan being included in our sort of network, and my relationship with him as well, having some sort of partnership and mentoring capacity as well. So a bit different, quite exciting, and but also some challenges there as well.
Yeah, I think what's helpful is each new site or each new church plan, gives itself an option to ask the questions again. And I guess what's helpful in terms of what I've seen, helpful to set some of those boundary markers up, from the start. So the Snug Church, for example, could have been a network church, but you could have set it up from the start, I guess, with the view, hey, in 3 years' time, we're going to send you off and make you an independent church plant. It's just you've kind of, brought that decision making forward and said, right, are you going to be an independent church, as part of, the wider network. So I think it's helpful for people listening in to say that each of these new options gives you an opportunity to think about, some of the key areas that you need to decide upon in terms of what resources you'll share, what the relationship with the sending church will be, the relationship with the pastor, are they a campus multi-site pastor, are they, an independent church planner? And so there's lots of complexity there. Brian, I want to go back to you. I want to finish on this question, and then we're going to open up for some questions, because there's some great questions coming through. So can I encourage you, if you do have questions, send them through to through the host panel. What are the benefits? What are the key benefits of moving to a multi-site strategy?
Well, there's a greater focus on the mission in that the mission is extended to new areas, and you have more people under the gospel in those areas as a result of spreading yourself out from the mother church into a multi-site sort of church. Secondly, it fosters a cooperation between the churches, and as I said, I think that's a really, really good thing. And even the example of the independent church cooperating and the other Vision 100 churches cooperating with our network as well in Tasmania was really, really beneficial. We spurred each other on to further church planning, to further raising up of leaders and so on. More people are involved in ministry. That's obvious, because as the mother church sends people out, they take up ministry, and then the gaps in the mother church get filled up with new people who need to take up ministry for those who have left. And so there's just more people involved in ministry, and that's just encouraging for the whole church and our whole network. There's more gospel growth, and that's obvious. We've seen that through the charts. the church plants receive greater support in financial, prayer support, administrative support, just focus of the work and so on. So they receive really good support. It's actually cheap to start. The way we started was that I actually took services in those church plants. I set the core groups up, got them going with evangelism, and then when we launched, I took those services at different times to when I was preaching at the Mother Church in Kingston, and then I handed them over to other leaders.
Brian, I might interrupt there because a few questions have come around the question of preaching, having a video, a video campus. Obviously now with the NBN, I think in pretty much all across Tasmania, the technology is there now to be able to beam in a sermon live. Probably 10 years ago that wasn't the case. Why did you pursue the strategy of live preaching as opposed to a recorded sermon, or even using a video sermon? Like I'm thinking of who's there now. You've got some pretty good preachers on the ground now as part of the network. What was behind the decision not to go video or not to hit play?
Well, we always felt it important for each church to have a pastor. Now, that's not necessarily a preacher. I understand that. People can say, well, you can have preaching from one person, but I think there's actually an important connection between pastoral work and the preacher. And that may be a fairly traditional view, but I see that as actually quite important, that the person who's preaching actually knows the congregation. So we felt that personal contact was really important. I don't think video sermons, I mean, it's great to have preachers from all over the place. We do actually, in the network, there has been a sharing of preaching in January, so that leaders actually circulate around their churches. But basically, we felt that important to have that connection of the pastor with his flock.
And I think I've seen that in the Holy Trinity Network as well. I think Paul Harrington preaches, 4 to 6 times in each of their sites. Part of that is to do with the connectedness question. How do you keep the one churchness or the network, community happening? Some churches gather together as a large group and, have 2 or 3 services a year where they all gather together to celebrate, or they might do that, once a year to say, hey, we're part of this bigger thing. But another key way is that key leader on the ground, visiting those churches and preaching, so that people have an obvious link. Because I would have thought as the network grows, larger and larger, and as you're less involved in planting the churches or starting the new campus sites, the link back to the mother church is obviously lessened. Did you have any theological objections to video streaming, or it just wasn't there at the start? That's a question from the crowd.
Yeah, it wasn't there at the start, but as I said, I think that there's a really important connection between the person who's preaching and the pastoral work that he does, that's basically how I saw it. I don't have a theory. It's a way you can do it if you want, but then you would have to employ somebody to do the pastoral work, some leader to do that sort of work. And he'd have to have a good connection with the person who's preaching, I think, to sort of make sure that sermons are relevant to the congregation. You can obviously be more personal in your preaching if you've got a connection with the congregation than so it's those sort of things.
Yep. I have done some reading. I can forward some things out there. One person's just asked, do you think Aussies have any problems with it? And I think if you are going to move to video streaming it, there is a need to go through a process. And one of those first things that you can do is actually just to stream in the service itself an image of the pastor who's preaching on a screen, just so people are used to seeing it. I read one example of a church in the States who sent out a campus plant and set up a video venue solely, and the people from the mother church had never ever had that experience of watching their pastor on the screen, and so that site failed. The second time they did it, they realised putting 2 screens up in the mother church, getting people used to seeing a video screen and seeing their pastor on the video screen, meant that when they launched the second church for the second time, that it was a lot more successful. Our next website this month is with Scott McConnell, and I'll let you know about that at the end. But Scott McConnell's done a whole bunch of research, written the book Multi-Site Churches. A lot of those questions, we can answer there. Graham, I'll keep going. The benefits of multi-site. The next one is it actually fosters church planning. So I guess one of the objections is that multi-site doesn't allow church planning, but your experience has been that it's actually caused church planning to occur.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it really does encourage church planning. And again, if you have a look at the results of that, and in terms of the number of people that you reach and so on, and the growth, you'd say, well, that's encouraging. I mean, everybody looking at that slide would say, let's do it, because this is a great way to grow the church. And we don't see that sort of growth necessarily in individual churches. Occasionally here and there, but that sort of growth is quite unique, really. And I think church planning it just encourages further church planning.
Yep, great. And the final one?
Helps develop and maximise leaders. If you're going to plant churches, you need to raise leaders. And so the focus on discipling every person and then training up and raising up leaders, MTS apprenticeships and so on, that really becomes quite important. And we actually felt that in the network we needed to raise up a lot of our own leaders, not necessarily within the narrow network, but within the Vision 100 network. There was a really strong emphasis on that. And a lot of those leaders actually have come in and become part of the church plants. And so that's a crucial thing. If you want to continue to church plant, if you want to move to further expand your multi-site, you need to be raising up those leaders.
Now, Mike O'Connor has asked a really good question about ministry team size and the efforts of in the larger church. He asks, when the ministry team is small, so only 2 or 3 staff members, how did you grow a smaller campus without depleting your efforts on the main campus? So you've got a small ministry team, starting a new site. How do you not deplete the main campus work? Yeah,
I mean, that was a real tension. And I felt that tension particularly because, as I said, we started the church plants by me sort of investing a fair bit of time with the core group, and then actually launching with the core group before I got a pastor in. I don't know whether that's ideal, but for us to get the whole thing going, I think it was necessary. But that did mean that I put less energy into the main Kingston congregation and had to get other people doing lots of things in that congregation, which is not a bad thing in itself, but it's actually a cheap way and an easy way to start. I also thought theologically, if you look at the church at Antioch, they raised up a whole pile of leaders, and who did they send out on this mission? Their best leaders. Apostle Paul, those guys that, they're the ones they sent out. So I thought, well, maybe, you need to set an example in this sort of thing, and you send your best leader out to actually do that work to start with.
Yep.
That's the sort of way I thought about it at the time.
And so, did you find that the main campus work was depleted, or did you actually, regularly see the main campus actually raise up new leaders, more buy-in from the mother church, or by the end of the 5th one, was there a real, we've got to do something about, the mother?
There was a little bit of a pushback when we sent out our 3rd church plant, Summerlees.
Yep.
Because 50 people went out, and they were all the enthusiastic people and so on, and there was still 350 people in the church, in the main mother church, but they were perhaps not as on board with the mission. Maybe I could have done a better job selling the thing really well. I mean, the fruit was already there in One Way and Bay, and then when the 3rd one came along, I think people just thought, oh, that's too much. But there still was a little bit of traditionalism in the church as well, so that sort of militated against it. And I had to sort of manage that a little bit, I suppose. But we constantly said, well, there's opportunities for new people to take up work, and we constantly also wanted to provide training to those people to actually take up those new roles in the mother church. Yep. But there was a little bit of a backlash after the 3rd one.
Now, I don't want to leave it just on the benefits. It'd be good to talk about the cons. Scott Curtis has asked this question: what do you see are the cons of keeping all the leadership central under one church and having multiple campuses congregation. So I guess in some ways, what are the problems of of a multi-site model? What are the things that you've seen?
Well, one of the things that I felt keenly was that there was an increasing administrative load on my shoulders, basically.
Yep.
And that took me away from my first love, which was just preaching and pastoring. I did continue to preach, obviously, but it actually reduced the time available for that. So that's something you've got to keep. And the bigger the network gets, the harder that is. And in a way, I think the move towards the network leaders sharing some of those responsibilities has been a really good thing. One of the things is recruiting leaders that don't fit into the sort of ethos and what you're seeking to do, and maybe have their own agendas. That was a problem with one or two leaders early on in the piece. I don't think that's the case with any of the leaders that are there now. They're a great bunch of guys, and they work well together.
And so that obviously slows things down. There's obviously relational pain there as well.
Very difficult, yeah. But in the end, our leaders were on a contract, and we just sort of said, okay, we can't continue at the end of the contract, sort of thing.
Yep.
And look, it was good to make those hard decisions because they were necessary, but it was tough.
Yeah.
At the time. Keeping the membership of the churches interested in the network. We had annual network meetings, but there wasn't that great an attendance from the outlying church plants. So I think we could have done a better job in trying to inform people and show people and encourage people with what's going and get them interested in the broader things. It's hard to get people to lift their eyes to see the vision. A lot of people aren't able to do that well, so you need to invest a lot of time in that, I think. And probably not enough reporting of the joys and sorrows experienced in each of the church plants through the network, and sort of praying for each other. So those are the things that I thought we could have done better in.
Yeah. Graham, did you have anything to add there? We don't want to paint it as just a rosy picture. This is all great, but are there any other problems that you've identified or seen in your experience?
Look, I think it's just helpful to go through some of those tougher things, because the reality is they force us to engage with important matters, and we've actually learned a fair bit from those, particularly in terms of staff recruiting and making sure things are okay and going the right way. Our review processes and our desire of the individual church leaderships to own their pastors and to really pay some attention to how things are going and ask the right questions has grown so much from where I started. I think we always had annual reviews, but there's been a lot more ownership of the individual churches. They've had to step up, and some of that's been because that's the right thing to do. Some of it's been because of stuff that hasn't worked so well in the past, situations that we've been through. So God is good, and even in these tough things, I think it's so helpful just to reflect and improve and know that God's sovereign in all of that. I think the main problem is with the growing number of churches. How do you keep big network and local church autonomy working on the same page? It's not an exact science by any means, and at times it seems to work better. At other times we're sort of having to work a lot harder to just to keep things together. But on balance, I think where we're at now, there is a lot more congregational ownership of good gospel dreams and visions that each church has. There's a lot more congregational ownership of their own budgets, and so Kingston has been able to have a time of regrouping and re-resourcing, and is now growing its staff team to a sort of level that it needs to be at. When we started planting churches, for instance, when I went to One Way, which was the first church plant to take that over, I wasn't there full time for 4 or 5 years. I was doing a half-time job there and a half-time job doing something at Kingston. So there's a lot more, of that ownership, which is the good side of autonomy. The issue is always keeping the bigger vision and mission in focus for people, and explaining and showing to them why it's good, not just to be a church on our own, but why it's good to be part of the network.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions that's sort of around the same area from Matt and Scott. Do you have a similar process for each launch? What were the things that you saw as a must-do? Can you walk us through the process of planting a new site from the main site? So obviously you did it 3 times. Maybe Graham first. What would you say are the key things of working out that process of starting a new site from the main site?
Well, the first thing is you've got to want to do it and be praying about it as a general thing. I think the second thing is being aware of the opportunities that exist. So I'm talking from a one-way perspective, and this was from Brian's time as well. Huonville is a bit further out from Hobart. It's a sort of a regional focus for quite a wide rural area, a bit separate from where we are. Mm-hmm. And it's an obvious place on a map that you think that would be a great place to start off in. But how to do it, no one's living anywhere near there. You know, maybe 1 or 2 families around the whole of the network as it was then live there. What's going to happen? Well, we keep praying. We want a church plant. And lo and behold, 4 families start coming to One Way from the Huon Valley, and another family from one of the other churches. And so suddenly we're able to see some answers to our prayers, and there's he sort of landed it in our lap, really. There's a bunch of people, they're serious enough to want to travel all that way, but it's a long way in Tassie, all that way to do church and be engaged, and they're really good guys. Okay, it's, green light, go. So then you're thinking, okay, let's get that group together, and let's get them, as Brian said, on board with the vision and the opportunity, and let's get them involved in looking at the practicalities, meeting place, and so on. And it sort of goes from there. There's documents of what you should do, in terms of the practicalities, and those are available, I think, from the document repository and the Geneva Push. But I think it's always the same sort of things. Who's going to do it? Get them together, get them thinking about the ministry, get them meeting, and then think about launch and so on.
Now, what happened with the Kingston network is that Brian was the leader of that starting group for the first 12 months. Is that right? In One Way and Huonville and Bay, or was only Bay that he was the leader?
He kicked off One Way.
Yep.
And then a chap came in, or was assigned for that. He certainly spent a lot of time at Bay. He was the main pastor for most of the time that he was here, but then he eventually handed that on to another sort of returning, trained up dude. Yep. With Redeemer, there was a chap who was a preacher, an ex-missionary, and ready and willing to get that started off from the beginning. But we had probably the first 3 years or so, we had shared leadership meetings, or Brian and myself would chair those leadership meetings down there. So that was the way that the oversight and the shaping was kept. But yeah, it's a matter of is there someone who can take it on? In the case of Redeemer and Huonville, that there was, in terms of most of the preaching, and we've just had to fill in some other gaps around the edge.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Brian and Graham. It's been great chatting in this morning, and really helpful to, hear the experience of one church in many locations, and to see how that's changed and shifted as new people have come on board and as new opportunities have opened up. It's been really exciting hearing from you. Over this month, just to let everyone know, on the website there will be an opportunity to have resources that are specifically addressing these questions that you've raised today around multi-site. For the whole month of February, we're going to be putting a highlight on this topic, and so please come back to the website. You'll see resources, audio, webinars from previous experience, practical documents as Graham's already talked about there to help you get a multi-site happening. Can I just draw your attention to coming up on the 17th of February? We've actually got the author of Multi-Site Churches, Scott McConnell, who'll be sharing with us and answering your questions about multi-site. Scott McConnell's a researcher at Lifeway Research, works with Ed Stetzer, and in 2012 basically interviewed and surveyed 40 multi-site churches across the states. So this sort of, approach has been happening since about, 2005 was when people first started writing about it. Scott's, done the research, thought lots about it, and is part of a multi-site church in Nashville as well. So if you are thinking about this, then can I recommend you, grab the book, but also get along to the webinar next week, or in a couple of weeks' time on the 17th of February. And then coming up on the 8th of March, we've actually got Ed Stetzer and Scott McConnell talking about some Australian research, some new groundbreaking research that we've just completed. So 8th of March, 9:30 a.m. again, we're going to hear from Ed and Scott talking about the results into a national Australian church planning study that we've done recently. So I just want to thank you again, Brian and Graham. It's been great having you with us, and I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Right, thanks very much, Scott, and thank you very much again to everybody who's participated this morning. We've actually had a flood of questions that we've been dealing with. It's been great to deal with that this morning. All that sort of participation makes planner sessions what they are. We'd like to actually say too that there's more ahead, so just don't log off just this moment. What's going to happen in a second when we do close the session is you'll get a chance to improve planner sessions. A little survey will come up, one screen, 5 questions, tick boxes. It couldn't be any easier. If you could just let us know what you'd like to see in planner sessions coming up, how it's worked for you, that'd be great. As you might have noticed, we're trialing a new form of software, and if it works well, we'll be sticking with it. Also, to come ahead, when we close everything down, you'll be automatically forwarded on your browser to the planner session page on the website, which is a great way of just checking out all sorts of things that we've already done in planner sessions. And so again, also an opportunity for you to let us know what sort of things you'd like to see in the future. Again, it's been a pleasure working with everybody this morning. It's been great actually seeing the questions flood in. Please participate. Please be part of the next planner session. I think you'll find that this is a great practical way of building the kingdom. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next planner session.